So for the last few weeks, we've been talking about this baggage that's in our lives, these things that weigh us down. This morning, we're going to talk about a very, very popular and easy subject to talk about. We're going to talk about anger. We're going to talk about how anger weighs down in our lives. And as you saw in the video, the thing about anger is we think by holding on to something in our lives that we're making someone else pay for it. We're making them pay for it. It's their fault. They're the ones. And yet, who is really the ones that pay when we have anger a part of our lives? It's us. And there's a verse in the Bible here in Ephesians chapter 4. We're going to look at a couple of scriptures today. We're going to look at something that Paul tells us about this area of anger. And then we're also going to look at a story that Jesus talks about how we address these things in our lives. And as you're kind of turning there, one of the things that just want to remind you, it's really easy when we talk about, like last week, guilt, this week, anger, and different things like that. It's really easy for us humans to say, well, I wish someone else was here to hear this. How many of you have sat in church and you thought, I wish so-and-so was here to hear this right now, right? We've all done it before, come on. And we think, someone else maybe needs to hear this. And because this isn't maybe the most comfortable things for us to talk about. When Paul and Jesus begin to pinpoint things in our inner life, stuff that no one else sees, that we're calling baggage. But I want us to think of it this way this morning. God, will you speak to me about what areas that you want to speak to me? And anytime I have a thought and maybe say, boy, that really goes good for someone else, Lord, would you shift that and say, what do you want to say to me through this? Lord, show me the areas that I might hear the word anger and go, oh, I can take it easy this Sunday. I don't have to worry about that. But Lord, you show me the areas that you want to reveal to me. In Ephesians chapter 4, which is where Paul talks about these issues here, he writes to the church here. And I want to read in the NIV, and it's going to be just a little bit different maybe than what you have in front of you. And we'll go back and look at it in the King James too. But the reason I want to read this is it puts it very plainly, very openly, very direct about what Paul says in verse 31 of chapter 4. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. In the New King James it says, let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. Now, as I mentioned, when we talk about anger, it's really easy to say, well, I don't have a problem with that. I don't really deal with that too much, or I've been able to kind of conquer that area. But I want you to notice the words that Paul uses here that talks about beneath the surface. Beneath the surface. Just some of the ones that we see in bitterness. Bitterness. Something that lost sweetness. Something that lost the attractiveness. Edgy with people. Critical of people. Another word, and again in the NIV, that uses rage. Rage. When I think of rage, it's violence. It's pushing beyond just something that is edginess, but that uses any sort of violence towards something or someone. Brawling or fighting, arguing. That's just what we do to settle things, is duke it out. And that doesn't, automatically we think physically, and that could be the case. But even just having to have my way. Slander. Slander, or as the New King James said, evil speaking against someone. This is putting people down. Associated in the same category as anger. Putting people down. Why? Because it's beneath the surface. It's what there. And do you know that I can put someone down and not look angry? I could do it in maybe a jokative way or just kind of a little smile on my face. But I want to just get my point across. What it is that I'm trying to make sure that you know that I don't like about what you're doing. Malice or wrongful intention. And you say, wait a minute. We're talking about anger, not the intention of the heart. That's the same as anger. Why? Because it's on the inside of who we are. Now, and I know we're jumping into it heavy this morning, right into the heavy stuff. But as we look at this list here this morning, it's easy to look and say, you know what, these are normal emotions. These are normal reactions. It's possible that I could complete this entire list of things in a single day. And there have been days in my life that this would be a description of a day. And that every single one of these things can come to the surface. But here's what Paul says. Very plainly. And either way you're reading it, get rid of it or put it away from you. Put it away from you. Now, the first thing, and some of you might want to do, is go back up a few verses in verse 26 and say, but wait a minute, it's not wrong to be angry. Verse 26, and we hear this all the time, be angry, but sin not, right? We say, so it's okay to have this anger, but watch the second half of that verse 26 there. Be angry and sin not. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath. So we will get angry, but what happens is not to let that hold on to who we are. I'm angry and very quickly move on from that. Not to let it harbor, not to let it fester, not to let it grow up and create this bitterness that's in us. And we often forget that second half of the verse, and this is where we end up carrying the baggage of anger in our lives. At a first glance, it's really easy for us to look and say, it's one of those cases that's easier said than done. If somebody walks up to you and tells you, don't be angry or don't do this, there's a little bit of defensiveness that says, yeah, well, you don't know my story or you don't know what it is that I go through or how difficult that it is. But I want you to think of who is writing this. Paul. And where he is writing this. This is one of the letters that we know from history and different things that's confirmed that he's writing this in prison. He's writing this in the middle of being unfairly treated, unfairly charged, as they did many Christians. And they didn't have this American rule that said everyone has a right to a speedy trial. And he was probably waiting somewhere around a year just to be tried for what they were charging him with. And Romans did not favor Christians. Romans looked at the Christian nation as a cult, as something that was, bad for society, bad for their government. One Roman leader in history admitted that Christians who didn't break laws kept rules in good standing, but they would still have to come before them. And here's what they would make them do. They would have like this little sacrifice altar and this false god. And it wasn't just as easy as something of say, okay, yeah, I don't have to say anything. I just have to nod my head and say, I won't share Christ, anything like that. It was more serious than that. That they would literally have to offer a sacrifice to this God to show that they were rejecting Jesus. And they would make them do this, or they would torture them. And when we say torture them, again, we're not just talking about the nice American system that we have, and they have to put them somewhere maybe that's safe, but we're talking about a torture that the government themselves, the one who's writing this said he didn't even know what they did to them and turned his eye and didn't even care what they did to him. And this is what Paul is saying in the middle of this. In the middle of this no chance to defend himself. There was no argument that was going to be there. You look at Stephen, who was praying when he was stoned for the people that were stoning him, and they kept going. They kept throwing them. They kept hurting him until the point of death. This is what Paul faced. And here's what he says. Get rid of all anger. Now, this is a different perspective when you think of Paul going through that. It's not just somebody sitting in an office or somebody sitting behind a chair or somebody sitting in a nice, comfortable church and just saying, listen, you shouldn't be angry. This is someone who by every human terms could be angry and yet said, get rid of it. He knows what it means to be wrongfully treated, but he also knows what it means to let bitterness rise up in you in a cell by yourself and angry with the world. Because he saw that in others that would have been in there with him. In chapter 3, and you don't have to turn there, of Ephesians, this was his perspective. I am a prisoner to Christ. The first verse, I am a prisoner to Christ, submitting to His will. So here I am in prison, and I'm not saying I'm being wrongfully treated. I can't believe this. What in the world is wrong with these people? We don't see that in this letter. We see I'm a prisoner for Christ and for you. We see compassion a part of Paul's life, even in the middle of what he's going through. But here's what he says the key is in verse 32, in chapter 4 there where we were reading. And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. In the same way that Paul lists symptoms for anger, in the same way he says malice and violence and all of these things and bitterness and slander, he also lists the things that should be a part of a person's life without anger, the tender-heartedness, the kindness. But he says something else, the key. The key is forgiveness. The key is forgiveness there. And it's not just trying really hard to forgive. It's not just saying, try as hard as you can to forgive, but that we forgiving one another as Christ forgave us. So it's not an effort of forgiving that is the concern here. It's that knowing that we, you and me, have been forgiven is the key to getting rid of anger and not letting that fester. And as Jesus makes this connection between anger and forgiveness, if you flip over to Matthew 18, he tells this story. Peter, the disciple of Jesus, just asking this question on forgiveness. And again, we're talking a group of disciples that knows what it means to see injustice, to see the government coming down on people and playing favorites and getting rid of others. They know what this injustice means. They know what it means to see a blessed nation that is not the top nation. And they're wondering and they're saying, when are you going to take your kingdom over, take this world over, Jesus, all of these things. And so Peter asks this question in the middle of it. You're talking about forgiveness, Lord. But how often shall I forgive my brother? 7 times? What is it that I'm supposed to do? And here's how Jesus responded with a story. Verse 23 in chapter 18. Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle his accounts with servants. And when he had begun to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. But as he was not able to pay, his master commanded that he be sold with his wife and children and all he had, and that payment be made. The servant therefore fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Then the master of the servant was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave him the debt. But the servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. And he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down at his feet and begged him, Have patience with me, and I will repay you the debt. Does this sound familiar? So when his fellow servants saw what he had done, they were very grieved. I just jumped like 2 verses. Let me back up. So his fellow servant fell down at his feet and begged him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay you all. And he would not, but went and threw him into prison till he should pay the debt. So when his fellow servants saw what he had done, they were grieved and came and told their master all that he had done. Then the master, after he had called him and said to him, You wicked servant, I forgave you all the debt because you begged me. Should you not also have had compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you? And his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due him. There's a couple things that we see in the story here. The first thing that we see is that the root of anger is this belief that you owe me. The root of anger is this belief that you owe me. This is different than last week. When we talk about guilt, it's that I owe you. It's that I can't let myself off the hook for what I did. I can't forgive myself for what has happened. But anger is a little bit different. It's that I can't let you off the hook for something that happened before. We see anger surface in this story. This servant, this man that was this victim, this humble, apparently, victim that was begging for mercy. This man that had a family and did not want to see his family be sold and step up begging, please, don't do this to my family. Don't do this, please. I will do anything that I can. And yet all of a sudden, this same man would go to the lengths of choking and grabbing a hold and being angry with someone because of anger, because of feeling that he was owed something. He was entitled to something. Believe it or not, this is where our anger comes from. Believe it or not, if you think about a conflict, and this isn't something we like to talk about a lot, but all of us that live at home with anybody else or have a family that we're connected to closely, live close by, all of us deal with conflict in our families. Right? You can say amen. It's okay. You can say amen. And what it usually starts with is when I'm expecting someone else to do something for me. When I'm expecting them to do something that they're not doing, or I'm expecting them not to do something that they are doing, and there's this expectation, right or wrong, there's an expectation that leads to anger. And we say something like, they think that they can get by with that with me. Nobody talks to me that way. And what happens is we think we're rightfully entitled to a certain behavior or a certain expectation from someone. I feel that I deserve to be treated this way. And that is where the root of anger begins to come. Because when I feel that I deserve to be treated this way, then I'm expecting others to treat this way. How do we know that? Because oftentimes, a simple, I'm sorry, or a simple, I'm wrong, or a simple, you're right, not all the time, but very many times will change our attitude about it. We're willing to all of a sudden, something that we were angry about, furious about, we're willing to say, oh, I'm right? Okay, I'll drop it now. That's all I wanted. Or we're willing just to say, oh, that's all I wanted is for you to say that you're wrong. You don't even have to say I'm right. As long as you say I'm wrong, we're done. Or a simple, and what happens is many times that is because there's an expectation there of something that we're expecting other people to do. Fair or not fair. That's where the root of anger begins. Something that not just conflict in the family, but something that somebody's done wrong. See, and I'm just talking wrong, somebody looked at you wrong on the road or in the grocery store. Something big. Something that changed the course of your life because of what someone else did. Something that affected you and others. And normally what we say is, they don't even care how this affects me. They don't even care how this affects other people. They're not willing to admit that they're wrong. Which is why most of our frustration and anger in life comes down to we feel that there's a debt owed to us. And that somebody owes us something for what they did. Now, I think that there's a couple things that's fair to say. I realize that what we go through in life, our stories, the things that happens to us can affect our attitude towards others. Some people have very rough backgrounds. Some of you may, and what happens is it does affect the way that we treat other people. And it explains our anger, but it doesn't excuse our anger. It maybe explains it where you say, yeah, that's where that comes from. But Paul doesn't say, unless you've been severely hurt, damaged, you've been emotionally traumatized, those type of things. If in those circumstances you go ahead and hold on to your anger, there's really no exceptions of an excuse. We understand someone better, but it still says, get rid of it. Separate yourself from it. I think it's also fair to say that we should be upset with people that have affected things in our life. There's emotions that do happen here. But there's something more dangerous than what they did that happens inside of us when we hold on to those emotions. When we go over and over them. When they go over and over in our heart and stir in our mind. And how could they do that? And we won't let other people in. We won't let other people come closer. We won't trust other people. We're bitter towards others in our lives. We're bitter towards our relationships. And what happens is because of something that happened, we push other people away from getting close to us. Every time we do, we get afraid and push. And we push. And here's the thing, the person paying the debt now is not the one who did something to you. It's you and it's me. We're paying for it now. There was a kid that I went to school with, and his name was Josh. And I remember Josh was a pretty neat guy and everything, but one of the things about him is he always seemed to get in trouble with teachers or with it didn't matter if it was a sub or a gym teacher or somebody just a lunch person. And he had this problem with authority. He didn't like being told what to do. And when he was told what to do, there would just be this chip kind of on his shoulder. And to most people and most of us, he was a pretty good guy. He really was. You know, he's fun to talk to, all of that. I ran track with him for 1 year. And but I remember even he would just be over and over again complaining about the running and the drills that we had to do. And I didn't like him either, but I'm like, if you're going to be on a track, I'm pretty sure that running's part of being on a track team. And I'm like, you know, I'm just as tired and just as frustrated, but I'm thinking, you know, but he would take it out on the coach. And what I watched happen with this young man is it not only became a problem with authority that started somewhere because at home, I guess it wasn't good. It wasn't a good situation. And so everybody must have had the face of his dad and the anger that was there lashed out towards them. But I noticed something, is it began to affect his relationships. And in high school, you know, he had a girlfriend, and you'd notice the tension that became there. You'd notice that all of a sudden, he would close everybody off in a day. And one day it would be, you know, really a good conversation. You'd come up the next day and be like, don't talk to me. And I noticed what started as just a problem with authority because of something that happened at home that we're not even sure of, that it began to affect his relationships. And he began to isolate himself from friends. It was in our senior year that we got a call that he had hung himself. And the pastor of our church at the time was there and was a neighbor of theirs and walked in and walked in with the mother who saw this and just devastated to this day. And this is what happens. While none of us say, oh, well, that's pretty extreme. And it is. It is. But what happens is when I begin to let one or two areas in my life hold bitterness, hold grudge, hold anger, is it begins to take over the areas of my life. I remember being chased as a kid and playing tag with cousins and sisters and all this stuff. And I remember one of the things is when you were trying to get away from somebody and you try to real quickly run in a room and close the door, right? But what would happen is if you could just before they close this door, if you could get your foot in this door, there was no way that you were going to stop them, right? And it's just this little tiny foothold that's just enough space to kick through the door. And here's what happens is anger is that little foothold. The door's not open all the way. I'm still a good, saved, church-going person. But that foothold is there. And it only is a matter of time before my entire life becomes a playground in the area of anger. And the relationships and everything is pushed away. But here's the second thing that Jesus says in the story. Not only that anger starts with you owe me, but that forgiveness is the only thing that will free anger. It's the same thing Paul says. Most of us, though, we know forgiveness is the answer. I know that that's not a earth-shattering thing to tell you. It's not something that I saw a bunch of you writing down. Oh my goodness, forgiveness is the answer. There's a book that I was reading, Enemies of the Heart, by a pastor in Georgia, Andy Stanley. And he says most of us that hear the word forgiveness react in three ways. We know we ought to forgive, but we can't muster enough courage. The second way he says is, if I forgive, I'm letting the offender off the hook, and it doesn't seem right. And the third possibility he says is that gone through the motion of forgiveness, but the feelings are still there, leading back to wonder if he'd ever really forgiven. See, most of us know that forgiveness is the answer. Most of us know that that's what it takes to forgive and all of this, and we could quote Scripture and say this, but it wasn't knowing forgiveness that was the key in this story. Why was the master mad at the servant? Because he didn't forgive someone else because he had been forgiven. And we're not just talking about an even trade thing. This 10,000 talents that was there, I'm told that this is probably millions of dollars. I'm told that this is probably a lifetime salary that somebody would never be able to pay back. And that a little denarii is, and I've heard two things. One is that 10 of the smallest coins equals one of these denaries. So a dime, equivalent. And I've also heard it's the smallest coin. And you know, who knows, but you're talking dimes and pennies compared to millions of dollars. Millions of dollars forgiven, dimes and pennies create anger and bitterness towards other people. What's the point? What's the point that Jesus would make with such an extreme difference? Is that the things that you and I hold on to as grudges are not worth it. They are not worth it compared to what has been given to us. If you're a follower of Jesus today, we have been given the greatest gift in the world and the greatest sacrifice in the world. And what does it compare to the cross, really? What does it compare to the cross? I mean, I was back there and we had this out just a couple of weeks ago. And I pulled it out here. But I want you to look at this. And this is by no way anything close to what the cross was. And the toughness to carry this thing. But look at the blood stains. Look at the blood stains that because of what you and I did when we were in sin, that Jesus said, it's paid. It's paid. Could you imagine a crown being slammed on a very weak head anyways of thorns? Can you imagine an impressing into the skull and the pain that was there and the blood that's dripping down, the embarrassment of being stretched out with nothing, laying with nothing, the embarrassment as people would come by and taunt and come by and, oh, well, the King of the Jews, who does he think he is? And why did he do it? Because of you. Because of me. And when we look through this, it starts to change what's happened to me. I start to look and I think, this isn't a big deal anymore. It might create some anger. It might create some things, some emotions, those type of stuff. But is it worth holding on to compared to what has been given to me? You know you at the lowest point. I know me at the lowest point. I know the things that I would be ashamed to stand here and say would be past. You do too. You know you. You not only know what you've done, but the capabilities, the avenues that you could have went down. If certain things, if you didn't have maybe the right steering growing up. If maybe you didn't have the right friendships of people that came in your path. If maybe things that we got by with doing, we got caught doing. You know those things. And yet here's what Jesus did. It is finished. It is finished. But I'm not finished with you yet, because this is more serious than that. Think about it. Think about, is it worth it compared to what Jesus did on the cross? And that's why he says to us, not only that it's just about trying to muster up enough courage to forgive others. It's not that. It's knowing that you and I are forgiven. That is why understanding the love of God is the single most important thing in our Christian life. That doesn't discredit the wrath of God that is in the Bible. That doesn't discredit the judgment of God that is to come. It doesn't discredit any of that. But why do I so often focus on this love of God? And it's not my idea. Look in the book of 1 John. Look at Paul here and what he says. It's because the key to you and I is not just trying harder to forgive. That's not the message this morning. It's that if we're not truly letting someone else off the hook, if we're not truly saying it is finished, we don't really get the cross. Amen. There's more of the cross that we don't understand. Maybe we've seen the picture. Maybe we understand the story. Maybe we could tell it. Maybe we could share it. Maybe we could do a play about it. But we don't get it, really, until we're willing to live that way. And I look at a man who's almost 30 years old here and has heard this his whole life. And yet it's true of me when I hold on to something that's not worth it. That I don't care how many times I heard the story, I don't really grasp it and what he did for me. There's a story that I came across this week. There was a man who had circulation problems, serious and painful problems in his legs. And I'm told that sometimes when people have amputation and they lose their legs or a limb of some sort, that they can go through something that it is like phantom pain. They think that it's still there and they're feeling the pain even though it's gone because the pain was so real to them. And there was a story of a man, it was used as an illustration, who had serious painful circulation problems, and he kept just cursing at this leg, angry with this leg. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. And finally went to the doctors and said, just do what you've got to do. Get rid of them. But he asked a very strange question of the doctor. He said, what do you do with them when you get rid of them? I mean, well, we take a biopsy, explore them a bit, and then just get rid of them. He says, I want them. I want them. I would like to preserve them in this large jar so that I can be angry with it, so that I can see what they did. And I am going to, every day, I'm going to express my anger towards these legs for having the pain and all of it. And it sounds crazy. I'm going to express that. But what happens is it backfired. Because every time when he would see those, every time when he would say, it would trigger in his mind this pain. And it would be just as if the legs were still there, screaming, angry, upset. Why? Because he's still looking at them. And it had triggered something in him that made him feel like they were still on his body, even though they were gone. We can post something up in our lives and keep looking at it, keep holding on to it. I can't believe it, I can't believe it, I can't. And what happens is we don't move on from it because we're not looking at the cross. We're too busy looking at it. I'm going to ask us to do something this week. I'm going to ask us to do something this week. In a court of law, in a court of law, a person is determined guilty or innocent by evidence and all of these things. whether it's money or something someone owes or something someone did. And I think the same process of thinking through helps us know who to forgive. Who to forgive. I hope this morning that you got an outline. If not, we'll make sure you get one out the door. Did you get one? No? Okay, we'll make sure you get one on the way out the door. But I want you to think of these 4 things and meditate on this week. Who am I angry with? Who am I angry with? Identify what that person is. Identify who they are. Because sometimes we're angry and we think it's at somebody, but it's not someone else. Just this week, I brought something up to Lois and kind of literally lashed out at her over something that she did. And it wasn't even really that big of a deal, honestly. And it was one of those moments, and some of you couples would understand this, but where it's like tense the rest of the night, and quiet dinner and all of that kind of stuff, and I'm seeing pointing fingers and that kind of thing. Not good. I'll move on. But what I realized was that what I was lashing out at her was because I was mad at somebody who was trying to be controlling and do this to me growing up. And it sounded exactly like them. And I thought, I wasn't really mad at her. I expressed that towards her. But it's because I didn't let something go that I thought, where did that come from? Who are you angry with? Who is somebody that is in anger? What do I feel that they owe me? What do I feel that they should do back? Put yourself in their shoes. What should they do in order to make this right? And then we have to consciously say, cancel the debt. Cancel it. It's done. Now, does that mean that we let it go and we're not going to have frustration and the relationship with them is going to go right back to normal? Probably not. It could, but probably not. But here's what forgiveness is about, is when I don't expect them to have to make up for it anymore. Maybe it won't get to the place where everything's jolly and good and smiley again, but I'm not going to expect them to make up for it anymore. I'm going to move on. That's what canceling that debt is. We know that in our relationship with God. There's things we've done that affects it, that cause us not to trust Him, cause us not to have enough faith in Him. But what does He choose to do? Cancel the debt. Yeah, the relationship may still have some things, but I'm not going to expect you to work your way to get to heaven the rest of your life. That's what happened to us. And then just dismiss the case. Dismiss it. Sounds easy, I know. But honestly, forgiveness is not a one-time decision. Because when I'm deciding one time to forgive, it's because I'm mad at this and mad at this. And then I kind of move on down the road, maybe several years, and I go, I'm still mad at this person, but it's over something else. I have to make a daily decision to forgive. I have to make an ongoing thing to let it go. And what happens is, just like guilt last week, it's not this one-time thing that I've gone in and forgiven everybody, but it's an attitude of waking up and saying, nothing between me and someone else. Nothing between me and someone else. I'm going to let it go. Keep in mind that phrase that we saw in the video, that forgiveness is setting someone free and realizing that was me, not another person. There's a song that I want to just play for us and invite you this morning, if you need to pray. If you need to pray in any way, if God has spoken, and I want you and encourage you to take with you, and I'll make sure we have a little handout thing, take with you and really pray this week. Really say, and just you and God quietly alone, is there anything that I'm holding against someone else? And let it go. Let it go.